President Trump is boasting about slamming sanctions on Iran, which is once again creating tensions with not just the U.S. and Iran, but with our own allies. He tweeted earlier, in part, "These are the most biting sanctions ever imposed, and in November they ratchet up to yet another level. Anyone doing business with Iran will not be doing business with the United States. I'm asking for world peace, nothing less." The sanctions, which had been eased under the Iran 2015 nuclear deal, went back into effect this morning as a result of the U.S. pulling out of the agreement. Now, the European Union is encouraging investors to increase business with Iran, arguing the nation has upheld its end of the deal. With me now, former Democratic Congressman Jane Harman, who is the president and CEO of the Woodrow Wilson Center. Okie doke, Jane. Trump appears to be threatening any country that does business with Iran. How is that going to affect the United States and Europe?
Well, regime collapse is going to be pretty hard to achieve. That seems what he's going for, unless they talk to us on our terms about the things we want to talk about, not what they want to talk about. But I think the rest of the world is not in step here. By blowing up the Iran deal in the spring, we lost the support we had, which was hard to achieve, from Russia and China and obviously the EU. And they're working against us, as you just said. And I think Russia and China are not going to care about these threats.
I want to stay on that because John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, said this morning he is not worried about countries like Iran and China doing a workaround, working with Russia and China to do a workaround which would make these sanctions less impactful. What is Bolton talking about? A workaround is exactly Russia and China's jam.
I think that's right.
How they roll.
I don't know. And hello, if you're Kim Jong-un and you're listening in and watching this new movie, we threaten regime collapse after we do agreements with countries to denuclearize. If I'm Kim Jong-un, I say, no way. And there really is no agreement yet with North Korea. So I think this makes the North Korea deal, if that one is in play, much harder to achieve.
To that exact point, what position does this put the president in? He did the summit with Kim Jong-un. He hung our flag right next to theirs. He said, over and done with. He gave me his word. They're denuclearizing. And then we hear from John Bolton again that North Korea is not living up to its denuclearization process. How can the president even save face at this point?
Well, I don't get it. I don't know what the end game is.
Probably not getting that Nobel Peace Prize.
I don't know. Well, you know, if he achieves world peace, he deserves the Peace Prize.
Yes, he does.
Let's go there. That's what his tweet says he's after. But I think he made it harder in North Korea today or last night. I think I don't see where Iran goes. And let's think about Russia. Vladimir Putin is working with Iran in Syria. We've basically given Syria to Iran and Vladimir Putin, and Iran is destabilizing Iraq. So I think, I just don't see how any of this leads to steps in any country that I can name that will create a more peaceful world.
Rand Paul just went to Moscow, and he then invited Russian lawmakers to Washington. Why would he do that?
I don't know, but we've had exchanges with Duma members for many years. I don't know. I don't get the timing now, given what the stakes are, it seems to me, with Russia. I think Pompeo, particularly Pompeo and Mattis, have created a framework where I think our relationship with Russia is where it needs to be, which is highly critical of the invasion of Ukraine and some other actions it's taking. But Rand Paul is a lone actor. I kind of respect his libertarianism, and I think he'll need to explain this to all of us.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.